Mes ginsimės iki paskutinės minutės. Mes ginsim savo radiją ir televiziją.
Ta naktį buvo paleisti 7 šūviai į Lietuvos laisvę ir nepriklausomybę.
40 dienų paieškų pagaliau surasta dingusi Vajagų šeima.
2 million residents of the Baltic states linked hands to protest not only what happened 50 years ago, but to send a message of defiance.
In the early 1990s, Lithuania's quiet villages were shaken by a series of brutal murders that left the nation in shock. Between July and December of 1992, a killer stalked rural communities, targeting elderly men and women living alone in isolated homes. The first whispers of terror began to spread in July, as the killer's grisly acts escalated in areas such as Kelmė, Šiauliai, Raseiniai, Šakiai, and Jurbarkas. Each crime seemed to follow the same pattern: a cruel and methodical attack on vulnerable victims, typically followed by a robbery. The elderly were often chosen because of their solitude, and the killer's motive seemed to be centered around desperation, seeking money to feed his addiction. As the murderers continued, the brutal nature of the crimes rattled the villages, turning once-safe communities into places of fear and mistrust. At the heart of the investigation was a seemingly impossible case to solve. With little to no evidence left behind at the crime scenes, authorities struggled to piece together the clues. The killer was careful, and each crime felt random, disconnected from the others, making it difficult for police to develop a clear profile. The murderer showed no remorse for his actions, only a growing hunger for more violence and control. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the killer's identity remained elusive, and each day that passed only added to unease in the communities. The killing spree began in the summer of 1992, when escalating violence reached a new level of brutality. The first victim was 70 years old, a man who lived alone in the village of Bernotai. The killer, seeking shelter for the night, was refused. In a fit of rage, the killer brutally attacked the elderly man with a stick, beating him senseless before setting his house on fire. To cover his tracks, he stole a bicycle and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of destruction and horror. At the end of July, I don't remember which day, while in the Lukšiai area, I went to an old man's house that I didn't know. I wanted to ask if he could let me stay there, the serial killer said while giving his testimony. I saw a lot of junk in the yard. It was about 11 or 12 o'clock when, entering from the yard side, I knocked on his door. He came out but stood on the doorstep and didn't let me inside. He listened to my request and refused to take me in. So I stood there for a while in the yard and found a stick, maybe 2 meters long, and knocked on the door again. When the old man opened, I hit him 3 or 4 times in the head. Since he didn't fall, I struck him a few more times in the chest and stomach. Only then did he fall, but he was still alive. I grabbed him under the armpits, dragged him into the house, and left him laying on the side. I started looking for money and found about 2,000 rubles of various denominations under the pillow. I took a harmonica with some kind of inscription from under the bed. I don't remember the inscription now, but I've lost the harmonica somewhere. As I was leaving, I saw a pile of rags in the hallway and set them on fire. Then I sat on the old man's bike and rode off, but I had to abandon it quickly because it was almost impossible to ride. Why did I kill him? I was angry at him for not letting me stay at his place. I didn't think about stealing the bike, I just wanted to leave the place faster. I don't know if the old man was still alive when the house burned down. The fire quickly engulfed the house, consuming both the victim's belongings and his life. Tragic death marked the start of a violent rampage that would claim several more lives in the months that followed. By August 1992, the killer's appetite for violence has grown even stronger. 2 more elderly men, both residents of Telšiai County, became his next victims. First was 75 years old, a retired farmer who lived on the outskirts of a small village. On a late summer evening, after the killer has been turned away from seeking shelter, he stalked armed with a heavy blunt instrument. The killer broke into the house and savagely attacked, beating him to death before ransacking the home for valuables. His intent was clear, not just to kill, but to steal anything he wanted. After the murder, the killer set fire to the house to erase any trace of his presence, a pattern that would become all too familiar in the coming months. The second victim in Telšiai County was 68-year-old, a widowed retiree who lived in a secluded farmhouse. Like many of the killer's victims, was elderly and lived alone. After a confrontation where the killer was denied entry, he struck out with a ferocity that shocked even hardened investigators. As the authorities scoured the rural areas for any signs of the killer, they could only watch as more lives were claimed in a gruesome, methodical sequence of attacks. On October 31st, 1992, in Šimkaičiai, Jurbarkas district, an 86-year-old man fell victim under the cover of darkness, broke into the elderly man's home and attacked him with an axe, leaving him gravely injured. Though the victim was rushed to the hospital, he succumbed to his wounds. As autumn faded into the harsher months of winter, the killer's crimes grew even more brazen. In early December, he turned his attention to two elderly women living in the village of Kerive. The two women have been living together in a small cottage on the edge of the village. One cold December evening, after visiting a neighbor and returning to their home, they found their doors unlocked, a sign of struggle. What followed was one of the most chilling of the killer's murders. He attacked both women, stabbing and bludgeoning them to death with a metal object, leaving them to bleed out. But what made this crime particularly horrifying was the killer's actions after the murders. He did not flee immediately. He did not set the house on fire. Instead, he stayed in their home for hours, eating their food, drinking their wine, and making himself comfortable in the very house where he had just ended two lives. He seemed to take pleasure in the violation of their home, in the domination of their space. He slept near the bodies. He ate near the bodies. Only after satisfying his hunger and thirst did he finally leave, disappearing into the cold night. Arriving in Raseiniai district, I found an uninhabitable homestead. I lived there for about a week. I found many old magazines, which I used to read. I had only gone to a store a couple of times to buy food. As the money was running out, I started thinking about where to get food. A lonely man lived nearby, and I decided to rob him. I wasn't sure if he lives alone. If there had been anyone at home, I would have asked for water. But there was no one, so I broke the lock and entered. There was no food, so I took VEF transistor radio. I wandered aimlessly, not knowing the area. The money was already gone, so I was looking for a farm with elderly people I could kill. I walked through forests and fields, avoiding Raseiniai from a distance. I slept in barns or in the forest by a fire. Eventually, I saw a homestead where an old woman was walking around the yard. Later, I saw another elderly woman. I didn't attack them right away because I wanted to make sure no one else lived there. When it got dark, I was sure there was only two old women living there. I found a wooden stick with a metal tip and waited. The old women were supposed to go feed the animals. One of the women opened the barn doors and turned on the light. I hit her in the head from behind with a stick. She fell, and I thought she was dead. I turned off the light in the barn and went to the house. Then the woman in the barn started screaming, so I had to go back and strike her a few more times. As I dragged her into the barn, I could hear she was still breathing, but I didn't do anything more. She was going to die anyway. I closed the barn doors and barred it with a stick, just in case. I waited about 10 minutes near the house for a second old woman to come out. I saw her through the window, cooking food for the pigs. When I struck her a few times, she fell. I dragged her into the shed, left the door open because I realized she was dead. After dealing with the old woman, I began to ransack the house, looking for money and items. I found 15,000 rubles at the bottom of the wardrobe and in the drawer. I also found 2 watches. Then I went to the barn to check if the first woman was really dead. I noticed 2 wedding rings shining on her finger. I took them off. After finishing, I made myself coffee, eggs with sausage, and ate. I also drank some champagne and went to the room to lie down and smoke. Around 4 in the morning, I packed some food into the bag, and in the barn, I found 3 more sausages. I walked on foot towards Ariogala, and then to the Kaunas district. The bodies were discovered that following morning, when a neighbor came to check on them after noticing their absence. The sight of two women, lifeless in their own home, sent shockwaves throughout the village of Kerive. For the first time, the brutality of the crimes became apparent to the police. It was someone whose cruelty seemed limitless. But even with the mounting toll of victims, police were still without answers. There was no clear connection between the deaths, beyond the fact that they all involved elderly people living alone in remote areas. The randomness of the killings made it difficult to predict when and where the next murder would occur. Despite numerous investigations and an ever-growing list of victims, it wasn't until December 21st that authorities would finally catch a break. The breakthrough came not from an adult witness, but from a group of children in the village of Muniškiai. These children had seen the killer's face in the news, the police sketches, and the reports circulating throughout their communities. One of the children, playing near the village square, recognized the man and immediately alerted the adults. Their quick thinking led to the arrest of Antanas Varnelis, making the end of a nearly 6-month-long manhunt. His capture brought some relief to the terrified villagers, but the horrors of his crime would forever haunt their memories. The investigation revealed the full scope of his crimes. Varnelis has committed 6 murders in total, as well as numerous robberies and attempted assaults. The fact that he has been living amongst the villagers undetected for so long felt like betrayal of the community trust. His ability to blend into rural life and gain the trust of others before committing such heinous acts was both disturbing and unsettling. In custody, Varnelis showed no remorse. His cold, detached demeanor as he confessed to the murders, and his chilling statements that he needed money and had nothing else to do, further shocked investigators. It was clear that his crimes were not driven by a single motive, but by a deep, unrelenting hunger for violence. Antanas Varnelis was born in 1971 in a small village of the Dotkai, nestled within Lithuania's Telšiai district. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by neglect, instability, and dysfunction. His parents, both struggling with severe alcoholism, were unable to provide a stable or nurturing environment. As the years went on, his home became a place of emotional and physical turmoil. His parents' inability to take care of him led to his eventual abandonment, and at the age of 7, he was placed into an orphanage, where his tragic path towards violence began to take shape. In the orphanage, Varnelis' behavior was immediately troubling. He had difficulty connecting with others and often exhibited aggressive tendencies towards the other children. Teachers and caretakers noticed his lack of empathy, a characteristic that would become a defining feature of his personality. As he grew older, his behavior became more erratic and dangerous. Varnelis showed no remorse for his actions, and instead, he was quick to anger and prone to violent outbursts. He was diagnosed with mild intellectual disabilities, which contributed to his struggle in school and social environment. But it was the emerging signs, his complete lack of emotional connection to others, his indifference to pain, and his tendencies to view others as mere objects, that truly set him apart from his peers. At 14, he began engaging in petty theft, often stealing from other children's or from local stores. He found satisfaction in the control he exerted over others, and reveled in the power his criminal acts gave him. Bullying became another outlet for his aggression. He would often intimidate weaker children, finding joy in their fear. His behavior was a clear sign that he was spiraling down a dark path. At the age of 17, Varnelis' small-time crimes escalated to more serious offenses. He was arrested for theft, having broken into several homes in his village. His criminal activities began to draw the attention of local authorities, who quickly realized that the young man had no fear of punishment. The system's response to his growing criminality was ineffective, and Varnelis was in and out of juvenile detention centers, where his violent tendencies only seemed to worsen. His short stays in these institutions did little to rehabilitate him. Instead, they reinforced his belief that crime was an acceptable means of survival and self-gratification. At the age of 19, Varnelis was finally sent to prison for a series of burglaries. It was during this time that his true nature began to reveal itself. Prison life hardened him, and he became known for his cold, calculating demeanor and his willingness to inflict harm on others. He began to view the prison as just another opportunity for power, an environment where he could manipulate and control others. In the brutal atmosphere of the prison system, he thrived, becoming more ruthless and more disconnected from any semblance of normal human interaction. Upon his release from prison, Varnelis seemed to momentarily reintegrate into society. He moved in with a former police officer's family, hoping to build some semblance of life. However, his stay was short-lived. A falling out with the family, sparked by increasing erratic and violent behavior, soon led to his eviction. With nowhere else to go and a deepening sense of alienation, Varnelis' mental state deteriorated further, and he began his descent into the violent spree that would terrorize rural Lithuania. Varnelis' first act of extreme violence occurred in the summer of 1992, when he attempted to sexually assault a 13-year-old girl. The girl managed to escape, but the crime marked the beginning of a horrifying new phase in Varnelis' life. He was unable to cope with the rejection and his growing sense of frustration. This failed assault only fueled his rage. The assault was a clear sign that he had crossed a dangerous threshold. Varnelis' capacity for violence had reached new depths, and he began to see murder as the only solution to the anger and disappointment that has been building in him for years. In February 1994, the Lithuanian court convicted him of 6 murders, 2 attempted murders, and a slew of robberies. He was sentenced to death by firing squad, a sentence that was carried out on September 28, 1994, in Vilnius. His execution brought an end to one of the most terrifying crime sprees in Lithuania's history. But the memory of the fear he instilled in those rural villages lingered long after his death. How such an evil force had remained undetected for so long, hiding in plain sight, before it was finally brought to justice. Thank you for watching this chilling story. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell icon for more true crime tales. I really appreciate you watching this. Leave a comment with your thoughts, ideas, or just chatting, and stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.